The woman I loved gave me 5 words that blew my whole life apart. It's me, or your parents. I made my choice. But 3 days later, I found myself staring at something that made me wish I'd chosen differently. You ever have one of those moments where you think you understand the person you're with? Like you'd bet your life you know how they think, what they want, what lines they'd never cross, and then they'd throw something at you so out of left field it knocks the wind out of you. That was me, sitting there at our little kitchen table, still half asleep, coffee in hand, thinking we were gonna talk about honeymoon plans or maybe which couch we wanted for the apartment. And instead, she drops an ultimatum like a bomb. Truth is, I laughed at first. Not a big laugh. More like that awkward little chuckle you make when you think someone's kidding but you're not entirely sure. I said, "Wait, what?" And she just repeated it. Slower this time, like she was explaining it to a kid. It's me, or your parents. I tried to read her face, but she was stone cold serious. That's when my stomach dropped. See, Emily, my bride-to-be, wasn't the kind of person who made empty threats. If she said it, she meant it. But this was different. My parents had never done anything to her. Sure, they had quirks. My mom talks too much sometimes. My dad's a man of few words, but those words can hit like a sledgehammer. But they'd welcomed her into the family. Or at least they'd tried. I met Emily at a friend's charity event 2 years back. She was gorgeous, classy, the kind of woman who turns heads when she walks into a room. She grew up in a part of town where people have summer homes and private chefs. And somehow, she decided I was worth her time. I fell hard. Fast forward through the whirlwind romance. The fancy proposal on a beach at sunset. And suddenly we're planning a wedding. But somewhere in between picking flowers and tasting cakes, little cracks started to show. Emily didn't love going to my parents' modest little house. She'd make comments on the drive home, stuff like, "Your mom means well, but she asks so many personal questions." Or, "Your dad doesn't really like me. Does he?" I brushed it off, thinking they just needed more time together. But it didn't get better. The engagement party? My parents offered to host it in their backyard. The same place we'd had countless family celebrations. Emily politely said no and booked a rooftop venue downtown. My mom tried to hide the disappointment. But I saw it. And the rehearsal dinner planning? She wanted a small list of essentials, which somehow cut my side of the family in half. I didn't love it, but I told myself, pick your battles. The weekend before her ultimatum, we had dinner at my parents', just the 4 of us. It was fine at first. My mom made roast chicken. Emily complimented it. Everyone smiled. But then, during dessert, my mom asked Emily about her work schedule after the wedding. Totally harmless, right? Emily froze for a second, then said, "We'll figure it out." My mom, being my mom, followed up with, "I just mean, will you two have time to visit us once in a while?" That's when I felt Emily's hand clamp down on mine under the table, hard. The rest of the dinner was polite but stiff. On the drive home, she didn't say a word. Not one. The next morning, I wake up to the smell of coffee, thinking maybe she's cooled off. I sit down, and that's when she hits me with it. It's me, or your parents. No warm-up, no discussion. I ask her why. She says she's tired of feeling like she's competing for my loyalty. Competing? My parents never tried to control me. Never told me how to live my life. Sure, they had opinions, but that's normal. Then she says something that really throws me. She's been testing me for months, seeing how far I'd go to put her first. I just sat there, stunned, thinking, who does that? I asked her, and what happens if I say I won't choose? She didn't flinch. Then we're done. You know that feeling when your brain is screaming at you to take a step back. Think it through, but your pride is whispering, don't let her think you're weak. That's exactly what was going on in my head. I looked at her, and in that moment, I made my choice. And here's the thing, I thought that choice was the turning point. I thought everything after would be smoother, less tense, but I had no idea that 3 days later, I'd be standing in a room full of people I barely knew, holding something in my hand that would make me question everything, her, myself, and the marriage we hadn't even had yet. So there I was, sitting in that kitchen with my heart pounding, and I looked her straight in the eye and said, "All right, I choose you." The words tasted weird coming out of my mouth, like I was betraying a part of myself just by saying them. Emily didn't smile, didn't cry, she just nodded, like she'd expected it all along, then got up and started rinsing her coffee cup like we'd just discussed what groceries to buy. I sat there for another minute, trying to process what I'd just done. I'd chosen her, but what exactly did that mean? Was I supposed to call my parents and tell them they were out of my life? Was there a rule book for this kind of thing? Truth is, I felt sick, not because I didn't love her, but because deep down, I knew this wasn't about loyalty, this was about control. Still, I told myself I could smooth it over, make it work somehow. That afternoon, Emily suggested we get ahead of the awkwardness and go to my parents' place to explain things. My gut told me it was a bad idea, but I went along with it. The drive over was silent, except for the sound of her nails tapping against her phone screen. My parents were surprised to see us midweek. My mom welcomed us in with her usual smile. My dad gave a nod from his recliner. We sat down, and before I could even ease into the conversation, Emily launched into it. We think it's best if we put some boundaries in place before the wedding. My mom blinked, obviously caught off guard, and asked, "What kind of boundaries?" Emily folded her hands in her lap and said, "Fewer visits, less involvement in our plans, and no unannounced drop-bys." My dad raised an eyebrow. "We don't drop by unannounced," he said. Emily gave a tight smile. "Last month's Sunday lunch?" My mom looked at me like she couldn't believe this was happening. I wanted to jump in, to say, "This isn't as bad as it sounds." But the words stuck in my throat. The rest of the visit was awkward. A polite back and forth where my parents tried to understand and Emily stuck to her talking points. When we left, my mom hugged me longer than usual. She didn't say anything, but I could feel it. She knew something had shifted. That night, Emily seemed lighter, almost cheerful, like a weight had been lifted. I, on the other hand, felt like I'd just dug a hole between the two most important parts of my life. Over the next couple of days, little things started changing. Emily moved my parents down the seating chart for the wedding, saying it was logistically easier to have them further from the front. She told the florist to focus more on her side of the aisle when it came to decorations. She even suggested we skip the father-daughter dance and mother-son dance because they were dated traditions. Each change felt small on its own, but together they were building into something bigger, something that didn't feel right. On the morning of the third day, I got a call from my cousin Mark. He's the kind of guy who hates drama. So when he said, "Hey, I think you need to know something before it blows up," my stomach turned. He told me there was a situation involving Emily and some people from her past. He wouldn't say much over the phone, just that I should come by his friend's place that evening. I didn't even tell Emily about the call. I just said I had to run an errand. When I got there, Mark handed me a small envelope. Inside was a single photograph, taken just a week earlier. It was Emily, at a dinner, with a man I'd never seen before. They weren't doing anything explicitly romantic, but the way they were leaning in, the way she was smiling, it wasn't how she smiled at me anymore. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was a work thing. Maybe he was a relative I didn't know about. But then Mark pulled out his phone and showed me a short video clip from the same night. It ended with her touching the guy's hand across the table. I felt the blood drain from my face. Mark said, "There's more, but I didn't want you walking into the wedding blind." I sat there, gripping that photo like it might burn a hole in my hand. All I could think was, 3 days ago, I cut my parents out for her, and now this? I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal, or the fact that I'd given up so much for someone who might not have been honest with me from the start. I went home that night with a plan forming in my head. I wasn't sure yet how I'd confront her, but I knew one thing. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't just be about us. It was about undoing a choice I was already starting to regret. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photo, her leaning in, smiling at some guy like he was the only person in the room. By morning, my coffee was cold before I even took a sip, and my mind was running through 100 scenarios of what to say, how to say it, and whether I even wanted to hear her explanation. Truth is, part of me hoped there was some logical reason. Something innocent the first could cling to so I didn't have to admit I'd made the biggest mistake of my life 3 days earlier. But another part of me, maybe the smarter part, knew that people don't just accidentally end up on a cozy dinner date days before their wedding. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I watched her. That morning, she was humming while she got ready, scrolling through her phone, occasionally grinning at whatever she was reading. It made me wonder, was she texting him? Planning another business dinner? I felt this knot in my stomach. A mix of anger and this cold, sinking dread. I decided to test her. I told her I had to run some errands and might be home late. Just to see how she'd react. She barely looked up from her phone and said, "Okay, don't forget to grab milk." That was it. No questions. No curiosity. I left the apartment, sat in my car for a while, and thought about what my cousin had said. There's more. I called him back and told him I wanted everything. He hesitated, then sent me another clip. This one wasn't from the restaurant. It was from outside. In the parking lot, Emily and that guy were walking to their cars. And just before they split, he pulled her into a hug, and she let him. Not just a quick, polite hug, one of those slow, lingering ones that says there's history there. That was the moment something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to be the fool who ignored the signs. I wasn't going to marry someone who could look me in the eye and demand I cut off my family while she was out having secret dinners with another man. But I also wasn't going to explode without a plan. I wanted answers, and if she wasn't going to give them willingly, I'd make sure she had no choice. That night, I told her I'd managed to get us a last-minute meeting with the wedding planner to finalize details. She lit up. Emily loved being in control of the planning. What she didn't know was that I'd asked the planner to have my parents, accidentally, show up at the same time. If Emily really thought she'd cut them out of our lives, I wanted to see her face when they walked in. The meeting started off normal enough: flowers, seating arrangements, music. Then, right on cue, my parents walked through the door. Emily's smile froze. My mom greeted her warmly. My dad gave a polite nod. Emily turned to me with that tight-lipped smile I'd seen before. The one that said, "We'll talk about this later." But I wasn't done. I pulled the envelope from my jacket pocket and slid it across the table toward her. "What's this?" she asked. Her voice steady but her eyes flickering. "Just something I think you should explain," I said. She opened it, saw the photo, and her face went pale. My parents looked confused. The planner pretended to check her notes. And for a moment, the whole room was silent. Then Emily laughed, a short, sharp sound. "This is ridiculous," she said, sliding the photo back toward me. "It's a business associate. We had dinner to discuss a project. At 9 o'clock at night? Holding hands?" I shot back. She rolled her eyes. "It wasn't like that." But I could see it. She was rattled. I didn't push further. Not yet. I just pocketed the photo and said, "We'll finish the meeting." But in my head, the pieces were moving. I wasn't going to call off the wedding just yet. No, I had something better in mind. I wanted her to think everything was fine. That I'd bought her excuse. I wanted her to be completely blindsided when the truth came out, because if she could humiliate me by making me choose between her and my parents, then I was going to make sure she knew what that felt like. Over the next 2 days, I played the part of the loving fiancé. I smiled. I kissed her. I even let her drag me to a cake tasting I couldn't care less about. All the while, I was setting things in motion: phone calls, quiet meetings, a few favors called in from friends and family who'd had my back since day one. And when the morning of the third day arrived, I was ready. Emily thought we were heading to a final walkthrough of the venue. She didn't know that by the end of that day, the entire room would know exactly who she was, and exactly what she'd done. 3 days later, the sun was barely up when Emily started rushing around the apartment, triple-checking her makeup bag, her planner, the little swatches of fabric she insisted on bringing to every meeting. She thought we were headed to the venue for the final walkthrough before the big day. I played along, smiling when she asked if I was excited, even slipping my arm around her as we walked to the car. Truth is, my heart was pounding, but not from excitement, from anticipation. Every detail had been set. The people I'd invited under the guise of helping with the setup. The photographer who thought he was just doing some early shots for the wedding album. My cousin Mark with the USB drive in his pocket. Emily had no idea she was walking straight into the moment that would unravel everything. When we arrived, the venue was buzzing with activity. Emily immediately launched into her element, directing the florist, correcting the placement of chairs, fussing over the lighting. She didn't notice my parents slip in through the side entrance, or the fact that the wedding party had all shown up early for no apparent reason. I watched her for a moment, thinking about the last 2 years, all the little moments I'd brushed aside, the warnings I'd ignored. Then I caught Mark's eye across the room and gave the slightest nod. He walked over to the DJ booth where the tech guy was testing the sound system. Emily was in the middle of telling the caterer that the napkins should be ivory, not cream, when the big screen at the front of the room flickered to life. At first, she didn't notice, she was too busy adjusting flowers. But then the room quieted, and her voice trailed off. On the screen was a still image. The photograph Mark had shown me, the one from the restaurant. You could hear a pin drop. Emily froze, her hand halfway to a centerpiece. And then the video started playing. The dinner, the laughter, the hand on the table. Gasps rippled through the room. My mom's face was unreadable. My dad's jaw was tight. And Emily looked like she'd just been hit by a truck. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. I stepped forward, my hands in my pockets, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is what loyalty looks like when it's not returned." She shook her head, tried to laugh it off, saying, "This is out of context." But before she could spin it, the second clip rolled, the one in the parking lot. The hug, the lingering, the way she looked up at him like she was 16 again and he'd just asked her to prom. The room erupted, whispers, mutters. Someone in the back even said, "Wow." Emily turned to me, her eyes wide, and hissed, "How could you do this?" I kept my voice calm, almost steady. "How could I? You made me choose between you and my parents. I chose you, and while I was cutting them out of my life, you were out with him. So tell me, Emily, how exactly was that fair?" She opened her mouth, closed it, glanced around at all the faces staring at her, friends, family, vendors, people who would talk about this for years. I could see her calculating whether to fight or flee. She chose flee. She grabbed her bag and made for the door. But my dad, yes, my quiet, blunt dad, stepped in front of her. "You can leave," he said, "but you're going to hear something first." He stepped aside so my mom could walk up to her. My mom's voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "You came into our lives and tried to pull our son away from his family. And he still gave you his loyalty. You didn't just betray him, you betrayed what marriage is supposed to be." Emily's lips trembled, and for a second I thought she might cry. But instead, she straightened her shoulders, muttered something about not needing this drama, and pushed past them. The door slammed behind her. And just like that, the room exhaled. My friends clapped me on the back. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others said things like, "Dodged a bullet," but I just stood there, letting it sink in. This wasn't how I'd pictured ending my engagement. But in that moment, I felt lighter than I had in months. The best part? My parents were right there. Not because I'd begged for their forgiveness, but because they'd never left my side to begin with. And as people started clearing out, my dad came up to me, patted my shoulder, and said, "3 days ago, you thought you lost your family. Turns out, you just found out who wasn't part of it." After Emily walked out of that venue, the room slowly went back to its usual hum. But there was this undercurrent, like everyone knew they'd just witnessed something they'd talk about over dinner for weeks. People started packing up, vendors quietly loading their gear, the florist carefully removing arrangements that would never make it to the wedding. I stood there for a minute, just looking at the empty chairs, the aisle we'd planned to walk down together, the little details she'd obsessed over for months. Truth is, I didn't feel sad, not in the way you'd expect. It was more like this deep, quiet relief, like I just stepped out of a room where the air had been slowly choking me without me realizing it. My parents came over. My mom hugged me so tight I could feel her heartbeat against my chest. My dad gave me one of those rare smiles that actually reached his eyes. "Let's go home," he said, and I knew he didn't just mean to their house, he meant back to where things made sense. Back to the people who'd always been in my corner. That night, I sat in my old room at their place, surrounded by photos from years ago, me in Little League, family camping trips, birthdays with lopsided cakes. I thought about the last few months, how I'd let myself get pulled into this idea that love meant giving someone everything they wanted, even if it meant losing pieces of yourself. And here's the thing, love does mean compromise, but it doesn't mean surrender. It doesn't mean cutting off the roots that made you who you are just to keep someone else happy. Over the next week, the calls and messages started. Emily texted first, long paragraphs about how it was all a misunderstanding. How the guy was just a friend she'd known before me. How she'd been stressed and maybe handled things badly. I didn't respond. Then came the calls from mutual friends, some taking her side, some telling me I'd done the right thing. And then, one night, there was a knock at my parents' door. I opened it to find Emily standing there, makeup streaked, holding the same envelope I'd handed her 3 days before. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I was scared. I thought if I didn't have you all to myself, I'd lose you." I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't feel the same pull I used to. I told her, "You didn't lose me because of my parents. You lost me because you didn't trust me, and because you made me prove something I never should have had to prove." She started to cry, asked if we could just talk, but I shook my head. "Emily, some things, once broken, don't go back the same way. This is one of them." I closed the door gently, not out of anger, but because that chapter was done. In the weeks that followed, I got back to normal life, dinners with my parents, catching up with friends I hadn't seen in months, even picking up an old hobby I dropped. And funny enough, I felt more like myself than I had in a long time. People think breakups, especially broken engagements, leave you bitter. And maybe they do for some. But for me, it was a reminder that family matters. That loyalty is a two-way street. And that anyone who asks you to burn a bridge that's carried you your whole life probably isn't planning on walking with you forever. So yeah, she gave me 5 words that almost blew my life apart. And I made my choice. But 3 days later, I realized that sometimes, the universe hands you a way out before you chain yourself to the wrong future. And if you're smart, you take it. I thought that was the end of my wedding drama. But then, about a month later, I got an invitation in the mail, not from Emily, but from someone connected to her in a way that made my stomach drop. Inside was a simple card with a date, a location, and one line: "You'll want to see this." And trust me, what I saw that day made everything with Emily look like a warm-up.